Welcome back to this episode of the OC story with Darrow the Assassin and Erasmus the Prince. This is episode 27, and we're going to continue right where we left off. Over the next few weeks, Darrow's wings did indeed start to grow. That, Erasmus realised, is what was causing the scars on the assassin's back, made almost from the inside out. The reason why they were so confusing, why they seemed to unheal as time went on. The reverse, not healing, but bursting open. Bone and feather was growing and forming beneath the skin, pressing upwards, making it look like an old healed scar, and then slowly fresher, more red, blistered ones. Eventually, one painful night, the bone burst through the skin completely, tearing and ripping open like a bad tooth at the back of your mouth. The assassin, to his credit, even though Erasmus and Tinny said he absolutely could if he wanted to, did not scream. Instead, he gripped on tight to the scabbard of one of his daggers, biting down hard, grunting occasionally but managing to keep everything just about under control. Blue eyes were screwed tight shut until the morning broke. After that, everything in the assassin's world seemed like a whirlwind. He could just about control where he was, the memories that flickered into focus before his eyes he could just about brush away. It was like wading through water, brushing reeds aside carefully with his hands as he fumbled his way back to the present. But always he could focus on the hands of Erasmus and Tinny in his own, of those eyes he knew so well, Tinny's laugh, Erie's smile, and eventually he grounded himself enough that he could see once again and be living back where he was in the present. His back ached and burned. It stung and felt like it was ripping and tearing open. Every day more feathers sprung up and appeared, growing faster and faster. To begin with, he tried to clip them. Tinny and Erasmus would not do it. They didn't want to hurt him, so he did it himself. He sliced at them with his blades, cutting them back, determined not to let them grow. But celestial blood, it turns out, is stubborner even than the assassin himself, and, much to his dismay, after another 5 months had passed, the wings were fully grown. They were vast, meters wide, in shreds of gold and silver, and they swung out on either side of him, making it quite impossible to walk in a straight line. He couldn't run, he couldn't hunt, he couldn't forage, couldn't climb up into their bedroom in the treetops without great difficulty, and this caused him no end of irritation. "They do look really cool though, Uncle Darrow." Tinny tried to comfort him one evening, brushing his wings with her hands delicately as they sat next to the fire. "Cheers, Tinny." But the assassin wasn't comforted much. He didn't want to look cool, although a tiny part of him was glad that Tinny thought so. He just wasn't sure what to do anymore. He didn't hurt. Now the wings had fully grown, there was nothing aching down his back, but they were heavy. They weighed him down with every step. He was no longer as nimble as he once was. Every attribute about himself that he'd carefully shaped over all those years, every part of him that felt of use, was now gone. He couldn't sneak, he couldn't hide, he could barely do anything, couldn't hunt. Everything was now encumbered by these two vast wings. He could only just fold them if he really concentrated, and they dragged down in the dirt with every step he took. "Maybe we could make you, like, a rucksack for them or something." "It'd have to be a pretty big rucksack, girl." "Well, maybe we could tie them up somehow." "I do not wish to tie Darrow up, Tinny." Darrow and Erie shot each other a glance. The prince turned just a little pink around the edges. Then an idea struck him. "I think perhaps the best we can do for you is help you practice, my love. We shall walk further every day. Just walk. Practice moving with them, getting used to the flow. We can help you climb up into the trees as we've been doing, but eventually I expect you'll be able to do it just fine yourself. You just need, well, time. And I suppose here we have an abundance of it, at least." Even in his grumpy state, Darrow could admit that Erasmus was right. They did have plenty of time. They weren't being interrupted. There was no one there to see. And that feeling niggled at him too. The idea of someone seeing him like this. Not just the wings and how ridiculous he felt, but how much of a failure they made him, how everything he'd ever known was gone, how incapable he was. He hated it. And perhaps that's what drove him, because over the next few days and then weeks and then more months, he did get better. They walked further and further. He learned how to balance the wings, how to sit with them just right. They skimmed the floor occasionally, but always he was aware of them. And over time, it stopped being an irritation, and it became just a part of him, another limb that he had to be aware of and monitor. And, slowly, he could run, he could hunt, he could fold them back enough to make him fleet-footed and streak through the grass. He could climb up into the trees, he could run across from their room to Tinny's, and everything calmed down in his mind just a little. Erasmus and Tinny saw it too, and both were delighted. It was Tinny, because of course it was Tinny, who raised the idea first. Her suggestion came early one morning while they were sitting down to breakfast. She looked across and said, "Uncle Darrow?" "Yeah?" "So, are you going to learn to fly now?" Darrow blinked, then put down his spoon and really thought about it. Erasmus, sitting between them, looked from one to the other, and a small, quizzical smile graced his face. He waited for the assassin's answer. Eventually, Darrow nodded. "I mean, I'm stuck with them. Guess I'd better make use of the damn things. Yeah, I guess I'll learn how to fly." What followed were several long weeks of a great deal of trial and a great deal of error. They started small, Tinny flapping her arms and bouncing around the fireplace in their camp, and Darrow copying her, although flapping his wings, but sometimes his arms as well when he couldn't help it. Erasmus watched them fondly, laughing occasionally at what they were doing and sometimes joining in with the antics. Eventually, they got to the point where Darrow could just about hover off the floor, but he'd never flown before. He wasn't sure how to do anything more than that. They decided to find a long stretch of path in the forest with cleared trees, and Darrow took it at a run, with Tinny cheering alongside him and Erasmus down the other end waving him on. He took off at a sprint, running faster and faster, flapping the wings until suddenly he was off the floor, and then, looking down, suddenly, doof, 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 he wasn't anymore. He landed hard in the dust, coughing and spluttering. The others ran over to him, Tinny cheering. "You got at least 2 feet off the floor that time," Erasmus asking, "Are you all right?" He was, of course, sweeping the dust off his knees, brushing out his wings, and deciding to try again. After a few days of this, he relented and called out to his father for any advice. The response he got was short and simple. "Trust in yourself, my son, and do not fear the fall." At the time, Darrow scoffed, but later on he realised just how good that advice had been. It was, it turned out, the slight fear of falling when he looked down from any height at all that held him back just a little. That sudden jolt and the drop in his stomach when he looked down to realise his feet were now 5, 6, 7 metres off the forest ground, and then his wings would stop flapping and he would be brought crashing back down to the earth. Slowly, he was able to glide, just a little at a time through the trees, and then they all decided that they should find a better place to practice, and Darrow decided he should probably try getting a lot higher. Eventually, after a few days exploring the forest, they found a piece of river that twirled into a patch of pool underneath a big, high waterfall cascading down many rocks. Darrow, they decided, could practice. Standing at the top of the waterfall, he could flap his wings and try to take off into the air. If it failed, there was a large section of pool and river that he could fall safely down into, and if it worked, well, then it had worked. Tinny was excited, Darrow was nervous, and Erasmus tried desperately hard not to show his own nerves. And so it was that for several days at a time, Erasmus and Tinny would sit on or in the pool at the bottom and watch as the assassin stood at the top of the waterfall, teeth gritted, fists clenched, flapping his wings, willing himself to just step off the rocks and into the air. Eventually, he did it, and immediately plummeted and splashed down into the pool, landing safely and spurting a jet of water out of his mouth as he coughed. He was soggy, but determined to try again. The first few days of this resulted in many soggy assassins climbing back out of the pool, up to the top, trying again, flapping and going and flapping and going and falling round and round and round. Eventually, they had to stop when the cold evening air crept in and Darrow began to shiver. Determined, though, they kept going back. And slowly, very slowly, it worked. One day, he took off, looking straight ahead, and soared straight across the pool, over their heads, skimming the treetops, and then doing a flip back round to land next to them on the edge of the pool. Darrow looked the most surprised out of all of them. And then there it was. Darrow could fly. Tinny asked for the first ride, and of course Erasmus insisted she took it. So, after a lot of practice and trying lifting her off the ground just a little at a time, eventually Tinny was clutched safe in the assassin's arms, being soared over the treetops, looking out at the vast, huge forest that they now called their home. It seemed to stretch for miles in every direction, and the more they looked, the more of it there seemed to be. They'd become accustomed to the magic of this place, though, and they were all fairly certain, as Erasmus pointed out when it was his turn to fly up high, high in the air with Darrow, that really the forest must have an end, as it had a beginning, and they had walked into it. So it must be some sort of magic, an illusion, an enchantment that made it look as though it went on and on forever. But really, it couldn't, could it? It was a few months after his first flight with Eerie that it happened. Darrow was out scouting over the woodlands. He'd gone further than usual, searching for food, more water, berries, anything they could spot. And then, all of a sudden, there was a sickening, blinding pain. It flashed through one of his wings and shot straight through into his shoulder. He cried out and began to fall. His wings flapping but unable to keep holding him steady, he crashed, tumbling through, past branches, down, 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 thud, bang, crash, until he landed with a sickening jolt on the forest floor. Terrible! Cursing, Darrow looked down and spotted the arrow. It was long and steely, and it was sticking through his wing all the way into his shoulder. He couldn't remove it, and he definitely shouldn't just yet, unless he wanted to bleed out right there. So, leaving it in, he crawled on his hands and knees and managed, slowly, to clamber to his feet. I don't fucking believe it. Look what we got here then. Darrow's blood ran cold, and he turned, staggering, to look into the face of a man he'd thought he may never, hopefully, see ever again. Maximus was standing in the forest, bow in his hand and quiver of arrows strapped across his back. Darrow should have known, really, that Tinny and Erasmus would never let him go flying off without having some idea where he was. Tinny had found an old telescope discarded by someone adventuring through the forest many moons ago, and she kept it about her person. Any time Darrow went scouting off further than they could see him with their own eyes, she'd watched him with the telescope. So of course, she and Erasmus saw immediately what had happened, and began racing their way through the forest to find him. Back with the assassin, though, he stared, blue eyes narrowed, a snarl rising at his lips, as Maximus stalked closer. Thought that was a big fucking bird, but no, I ain't shot down dinner for tonight. I've shot down the thing I've been looking for 3 fucking years. Look at the state of you. What in all the hell's happened? Darrow fucking cast. Filthy little blunter went to hide in the woods, did he? I fucking knew it. I've been searching for you a long fucking time. Always knew I'd catch you. Last anyone saw of you, you was sneaking out of town in the middle of the night, creeping towards the trees. And I thought to myself, there's no way a snivelling brat like that would crawl away in the middle of the night. But then I thought, oh yes, there is. That's exactly what a blunter like you would do. Refuse to die, don't you? Well, we're gonna fix that. We're gonna fix that right fucking now. So you spent the rest of your life looking for me? Maximus, I'm flattered, but what a waste of fucking time, huh? Not a waste of time if I get to ace you out right now, Blunter. And look at ya. Look at the state. What has happened to you? Always knew you was fucking wrong. And now, got yourself in a whole world of trouble, ain't ya? What these wings for, eh? Get on the wrong side of some witch's spell, did ya? Thought you was special, did ya? Maybe you tried to turn yourself into a bird and fly away from all your responsibility, like the responsibility of dying like you was told to. The only thought now plastered across the assassin's mind was protecting Erasmus and Tinny. Maximus didn't seem to know about them, and if he could keep their camp from being discovered, he would. If that meant dying here, he would do it. He would do it so that Maximus never went any further into the trees. If he thought he'd found what he had come for, he wouldn't look any further. He wouldn't find the camp. He wouldn't find the others. So, hunched a little under the pain of his shoulder, he stood as tall as he could and stepped towards the humongous man. Go on then, Maximus. Do it. Do the one thing you want in life anymore. Kill me. 'Cause that's all you got left, ain't it? Killing me. Do it. Go on. Kill me. Without another word but a gleeful grin, Maximus threw down his bow, dragged two sharp, razor-like arrows out of his quiver, and lunged forwards. Darrow tumbled sideways and seized his own blade, raising it ready to strike back. The pair crushed into each other, blades flashing, arrows rising and falling, blood spilling in every direction as they tumbled over and over on the ground, up into the air, pressed against trees, gnashing teeth, snarling, biting insults. Filthy blunter! Maximus roared, stabbing into the assassin's leg. Darrow howled in pain and kicked back at him, sending Maximus staggering back a few steps as he lunged forwards, pursuing him hotly, grabbing at the man's side, throwing them both over into the grass as he pummeled into the man's face. And then, suddenly, in the midst of things, they heard running feet and shouting voices. Uncle Darrow! Darrow! Blue eyes remained focused and on target as he slammed his blade down hard into Maximus's arm, but Maximus turned to look, and that grin spread across his face once again. Aha, so there's more of you. I should have known. And is that... It was then that Darrow knew Maximus had to die. He'd recognized them. He'd seen the rich red hair, recognized the face of the prince accused, wanted, and the face of the missing princess. He'd wanted to kill the man for such a long time, and now it wasn't just about him anymore. It had more reason, more weight behind it, more understanding, maybe. Could this possibly be forgiven? In the grand scale of his life, if he ever got to meet that big, vast, great beyond in the sky, would this be forgivable? Maximus would tell. He would tell anyone and everyone. They would get soldiers here, criminals here, everyone here. They would be dragged out and death would soon befall them, and he could not have that. Never have that. He stabbed down again hard, just missing Maximus's heart. As the man stared up at him, blood pooling down the sides of his lips, he grinned. You actually gonna finish the job this time, filthy little fucking blunter? To this, all the assassin said was, Yeah, I am. And then he didn't stab, didn't slice. The blade didn't come down at all. Instead, with something burning inside him he couldn't explain or understand, A bright, white, hot light burst from him. It shattered through Maximus like breaking glass, and the man lay dead in pieces on the forest floor. And that is where we shall leave this episode for today. Up next, a question for you guys to vote on. Do you think that Erasmus, Tinny, and Darrow should leave the forest? They could stay. They've set up a nice home. They've got a camp. They've got a way of life. Should they stay or should they go? Try and go back and see the world. It's been several years now. What do you think? Should they give it a try or should they stay here? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, I did promise to tell you guys what the current working title for this project is. So obviously the series over on YouTube here is called the OC Story because, well, that's what it's called. But I am turning it into a book and hopefully an audiobook. It's written down. I've got a bunch of chapters, I think maybe 10 altogether in total. I'm totally writing them in order and not just skipping around back and forth to whatever I feel like writing at the time. Honest. So anyway, you guys have been guessing, some of you DM'd me, and some of you have got it sort of right. Some of you are in the right ballpark, but I'll put you out of your misery. So the working title currently for this project is Consecrated Blood. And here's a cute little mock-up that I did of a little sort of front cover-ish. Well, it's the cover I've got on the notepad that I've got that I'm writing the bits of this story in, and it's one of the bits I've got on the background of my phone at the moment. So, working title, working cover, Consecrated Blood. Thank you for those of you who guessed, thank you for those of you who are still listening, and I appreciate the hell out of all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.